Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next in our short series of interview-based webinars on aspects of the zero trust model for cybersecurity, which is now the root of a vast overhaul of federal IT security architectures that's now also influencing security architecture in public clouds, networks, and enterprises large and small. Since zero trust is arguably the future of cybersecurity, or so it's looking, these conversations will introduce key people evolving this discipline and hopefully provide takeaways meaningful for technology practitioners for charting a zero trust future for their organizations. Today, our guest is George Finney, who is Chief Security Officer at Southern Methodist University. George has taught cybersecurity at SMU, and he's been recognized as one of the top 100 Chief Information Security Officers in the world by CISO's Connect. He has over 20 years experience in the industry with startups, global telecommunications firms, and nonprofits. And he's the author of Project Zero Trust, which I will show you. From its cover, it's a story about a strategy for aligning security in the business. And it was published this year by Wiley and is available on Amazon. You will see the link in the periphery of the screen. Where it has a 4.7 out of 5 rating with a similar rating on Goodreads. So that's better than a lot of novels by famous people that you may be reading right now. You have absolutely read books like this before. In a sense, Project Zero Trust is a classic thriller. And then you've also probably read books like this before because it's also, in a sense, a best practices manual for IT implementers about people confronting a real-world crisis and building a zero trust implementation from scratch. It's probably the only thriller with a foreword by John Kindervag, Zero Trust's initiator. So we jump right into the action with this book. It's 4:43 a.m. Dylan can't sleep. He's starting a new job today at March Fitness. He's about to report to CIO Noor Patel. And then a couple hours later, he's sitting in a war room with Patel, a security consultant. Neither of these folks have been fired. And he's watching the company burn down around him because of a ransomware attack. It's a hell of an opener. It follows the classic steps of the hero's journey here, but uses the typical thriller story, no build up. We're just going to go with a mise en scène and drop the hero into a disaster. And you talk immediately about trust as a vulnerability. We talked a little bit with John Kindervag about this, about his blog from 2017 and some other things, but I feel it's hard to overthink such maybe a strange sounding idea. It's a strange idea in a world where people try to establish untrusted and trusted zones around things that make access dependent mostly on the identity of people and maybe entities who they hope they trust. So what's your take on trust as a vulnerability?
Oh my gosh! So first, thank y'all for having me on the show. I'm totally honored to be here and to chat with y'all. Gosh, trust is a vulnerability. John actually has a shirt made up that says "Trust is a vulnerability," and it's fascinating, right? When you talk to folks like pen testers, the number one thing that they go after is trust. And so when you think about trust, right? I was on a conversation earlier this week with a panel, and isn't zero trust just just another way of saying least privilege? And haven't we been doing that for a long time? And I think it's interesting the nuance of that, because those trust relationships are how the bad guys get in, but it's hard to recognize sometimes. When you have a trust in a digital system, because you can't see trusts, right? They're ephemeral. They're hard to spot. Maybe you can think about in terms of identity permissions, right? And having least privilege, you don't need to have those credentials to get in. But gosh, those trusts are everywhere inside computers, right? Whether it's your app doesn't need those permissions to run. You've got holes in your firewall that really are for convenience for an IT person to manage a server, for example. That's another great example of a trust. And there's so many ways that IT folks can take shortcuts in a way. You can start any service or any computer and make something work relatively quickly if you're an IT person, and really what we want to encourage people to think about in terms of security is to spend that extra little bit of time to think about, wait, what trusts are we having on the system? And some systems are so big these days, you have to have an interdisciplinary group of folks. Maybe it's a DBA, maybe it's a developer, maybe it's a cloud architect, maybe it's a help desk person or a trainer or a desktop support person, right? Think about all the folks that are involved in IT, and now that you've got a committee of folks essentially working to secure a system, those trusts get even harder to spot. And so, one of the things that I think Zero Trust does, in a way, it's a rallying cry to help all of these different kinds of folks with different kinds of expertise come together and to solve the challenge that we have, which is the bad guys need trust to get in and do the damage that they have. So, yeah. I mean, and I love starting with ransomware because it is today and has been for a couple of years and probably will be for a few years the number one issue that we've got. And for some companies, it's an existential threat, right? Your company could go out of business if there's a severe enough case.
The mise en scène in your book then jumps into what I think are very powerful set of small integer number of chapters, where you lay it all out, and you lay it all out with action, and you don't let the reader's attention flag, and it really does keep reading like a thriller. But there's a tutelary aspect to it. I mean, you bring in personalities like Aaron, the guru, and various other experts from outside, and somehow you manage to slip in the commandments, right? I mean, there are a couple of short lists of things that you folks who teach and do this stuff have boiled this down to 4 and 5 item lists, like, for example, focus on business outcomes, design from the inside out, determine who and what needs access, and then inspect and log all traffic. And it's like, really, once you've heard the spiel, that's all you need, right? It's a lot simpler than a lot of other kind of talks about security architectures with complexity. How did you guys manage to boil so much complexity down into such simple, almost business book level, edicts?
I've got to give John all the credit in the world here. I mean, those first 4 design principles that you talk about, those are what he came up with back in 2010 when he released the paper while he was at Forrester, No More Chewy Centers. So that paper is still available out. You can Google No More Chewy Centers and see how he kind of laid it out. And of course, when you write a book like this, I spent a ton of time doing research into everything that's out there on Zero Trust, all of the other books. There's only 2 other books at the moment. But, the Google Beyond Core papers and, the NIST Zero Trust standard 800-207. And man, I mean, I've been doing security for a long time. And even me going and sitting down with the NIST standard, I mean, it's so complex and unreadable, right? And if it's a challenge for existing security practitioners to wrap their arms around, it's not, Zero Trust isn't going to be even remotely approachable for an IT person who's maybe the only person in your shop doing security. So we had to find a way to kind of distill those lessons down and make it something that is more than just the marketing hype that's out there. And so, in a way, the book was my intent or my way of helping the community bring Zero Trust back in from the marketers, right? And the way we do that, right? Just like I was really inspired by another book that's very similar called The Phoenix Project by Gene Kim. And that's really one of the things that helped, in a way, crystallize the DevOps movement among developers to show them how it's done rather than telling them how it's done. When the publisher approached me about writing the book, I wanted to do it this way, in a way to make Zero Trust, right? Something that anybody in IT can pick up and read and understand, and and not just understand, but have something actionable to take forward, right? So you mentioned the first 4 design principles. Start with the business, right? That's one of the things that we lose in the conversation around zero trust architectures and the NIST standard, because zero trust isn't an architecture; it's a strategy. And it, as a strategy, right, starting with the business, that's one of the fundamental things we as CISOs have been talking about for the last 5 or 10 years, right? We've got to understand the business, and that being foundational to your zero trust strategy is so important. But designing from the inside out, least privilege, logging everything, right? Start with those first 4. And then there's also a 5-step design methodology that John has built over the last 15 years in his consulting work at Forrester and Palo Alto Networks, and now at Onto. Again, think about how you roll out projects, and do we have a strategy as CISOs for how we do things? Can we articulate that to the board? I think really zero trust is the only strategy we have out there, but also, do we have a repeatable process for securing systems, or is it just, I'm going to wing it. I'm an expert. I know how to get these things done. It's an art instead of a science. No, just have a repeatable design methodology that anybody can be a part of and take back to your organization. Those actionable things are so important. Again, we figured out a case study where we could kind of help folks understand that. So in a way, I think there's only 10 or 11 chapters, but each chapter is, both a deep dive into a specific protect surface that you will want to and be able to bring back into your organization, whether it's physical security or your ERP system or your SOC. But also at the same time, each chapter is also a deep dive into, one of the design principles, or a deep dive into one of the steps in the design methodology, right? So there's kind of a unique focus on them, while we're doing the action, and while the hackers like getting in and taunting them on Twitter. So, you get that live feeling. And I think it's so much more relatable than just a long, 1,000-page reference guide on every little nuance. I think, again, it's so important to bring humans into the thing and have someone, if you're a network engineer, Harmony is someone you can relate to, and you have maybe been through those situations in the past, and you could, just like CISA, their motto now is see yourself in cyber, right? That's what we're doing when we have these real humans in the story that you can, come back and say, okay, I need to channel my inner Harmony or my inner Aaron at this point. By the way, not everybody's picked up on all the pop culture references in the book, but the names of folks are important, right? Little things you can pick up along the way. Gosh, it's such a fun read. What a phenomenal project!
Now I have to reread it.
So you mentioned the zero trust guru in the book. His name is Aaron Rappaport. So if you're a cyber nerd like I am, one of the most important cyber movies, I don't know if it's important, the movie The Interview with Seth Rogen, that was Seth Rogen's character, and of course that's the famous movie that caused, I guess, the Sony breach with North Korea. They were upset about it. That's Aaron Rappaport was Seth Rogen's character, and I just thought, just little nods like that. It was fun to kind of get in there and hide those little Easter eggs.
Now I'm going to have to find all the Easter eggs. So you jump into you jump into the disaster, and I guess that's important too, because it reminds people, if nothing else, that the business keeps happening around any implementation effort. And you talk about things like the Kipling method as a basic framework for talking about granular policy definition. I guess what I'm kind of wondering, what I've wondered through these interviews and our various conversations, is what are the tools? I mean, we assume that we're replacing an existing security architecture of some sort. right? Things need to keep working. And now we need to do a new thing. And John said, we can use existing tools to some extent to do this, but carefully. What he talked about is moving forward in a way that establishes protect surfaces around individual entities. And he, isolated, the book talks about isolating practice entities that are low risk and low importance, right? Um, but then it talks about climbing what looks like a very steep curve, and you actually have a diagram in the book of what the curve looks like, where you jump through practice problems very quickly, and now you're dealing with crown jewels things, right? Presumably, these are the most business critical systems, or components of the most business critical systems. Does this really work in practice? I mean, you actually did this at SMU, didn't you?
Oh, absolutely.
They
Yeah. So,
implemented.
again, one of the things that I loved about the book is, I obviously I got to work with, John Kindervag, which was just amazing. And he's an awesome human being. And, he was just like, when I was approached to write the book, I was kind of like, you know what, I've written a few books. I need to take a break a little bit. Let me just introduce you to John. He's been talking about writing this book for a long time. And John's like, man, I can't do it. I'm too busy. I've got this, startup that I'm kind of building. And he was like, you take it and run with it. And the cool thing for me was being able to take the work that I'd been doing as a CISO and kind of, connect all of the dots together into a big picture. And so, you talk about, the tools, right? Every organization is wildly different in terms of the tools they use or the technologies they need to support. So, there's no one way to do it, right? Just like the candy, there's no wrong way to eat a Reese's. There's no wrong way to do zero trust, and you're probably doing, some things already in your environments. And zero trust is a way of just kind of continuing your maturity journey. There may be tools along the way that you kind of have to have, right? You're probably going to need EDR, or modern antivirus. You're probably going to need firewalls or WAFs or other things. And the thing that I think helps, when my CIO started, I worked with like 6 or 7 CIOs in my career. And he sat down and he's like, George, how do we know when we're done? How do we know when we've done enough for security? And that question has really stuck with me over the years. And all of the other, what maybe the things that we think of as strategies in security. Think about defense in depth, for example. I don't think defense in depth is a strategy, by the way. I've had arguments with folks about this. If you think of defense in depth, what's a strategy? Strategy is, a plan to reach a goal, right? It's 2 parts. You have to define the goal that you're trying to reach and how you're going to achieve it. So the definition of zero trust, we haven't talked about that yet, but the definition of zero trust is it's a strategy for preventing or containing cybersecurity breaches by removing the trust relationships we have in digital systems. So cool. My goal is to prevent breaches. The strategy is I'm going to remove the trust relationships because I know that's what the bad guys go after. With something like defense in depth, you don't really. I mean, the goal is really just to manage failure states in the layers of security. It doesn't inform you about why there are failure states. You just assume that that's going to happen, and the way that you handle that situation is you just add more layers, right? So most people call defense in depth expense in depth because there's no definition about when you're done, and there's no thought process about how to tailor those controls to a specific environment. You just need more of them. Whereas zero trust, right? If I know what I'm protecting, I can be thoughtful about how I'm going to protect it. I don't need to deploy all of my security layers equally across all of my environments. That drives up cost. It ends up not being closely tailored to that. protect surface, right? Protect surface is one of the concepts in the book. And so zero trust does inform you about, here is, the environment we're protecting. We've covered all of the, we've covered all the choke points, the entrances and exits. We've got the tools that we think we need are good enough to do the job. And built into the process, there's a way of validating that. Again, another strategy might be, we're going to be compliant. So as a strategy, the goal is to be compliant. How you deliver that goal is, I guess, to check the boxes in whatever framework you've got. Again, it's not about the actionable day-to-day work you're going to have to do. You're going to try and check all those check boxes for everything you're doing, whether those really apply or not. Again, tools, right? You can solve problems a lot of different ways, and just taking a step back. I mean, I know we're thinking about tools, but I think the most important part of zero trust, and maybe what distinguishes it from those other things like defense in depth or compliance, is the most important part of your security program are the people, right? The most important part of zero trust are the humans that have to go live every day and do it. So when I live my life, I'm not living my life according to the NIST framework. I've got to have repeatable habits, and I've got to be able to have something that I can think of to guide my actions on an everyday basis. And zero trust kind of gives you that vision, and because we've distilled it down as much as we can, that's something that again, a help desk person can understand and know and relate to.
I guess where my brain breaks thinking about zero trust is I think about an entity in a compute environment. I think about a Linux instance running on a cloud. And I think about the mechanisms that I can access via the command line of that Linux instance to make it harder, because I've done server hardening. I can close ports, I can turn off SSH, I can blah, 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 blah. I mean, there's this whole list of things that people do, right? Within the box. But then if I'm running on a cloud system, I also have security groups and other stuff that basically wrap around the box and give me a way of expressing, so just forget about the box for a second. What things can happen here, right? Who's allowed in and how are they allowed in and stuff like that. And my mind goes there as, when I'm thinking about, so if you had to implement zero trust and you had to do it in less than 1,000 years on many different entities, wouldn't you absolutely sort of have to insist that everything ran in a cloud and had some common abstraction for access, network connections and so on running around it that you could look at and maybe think about automating, at scale? Isn't that a sort of a prerequisite?
I think, definitely understanding whatever it is that you're doing is one of the biggest challenges, right? With doing zero trust or really supporting any system, because today, especially with the size and complexity of applications we have, it's very hard to understand everything that application is doing for a single human. So you're by necessity having to rely on multiples of humans to kind of wrap your arms around that situation. And I think cloud in a lot of ways makes that a little more challenging, because you're not just having humans in your company run that. You've also got the humans doing security in AWS or Azure or Google Cloud or what have you. And maybe that's for an infrastructure service, or maybe you're looking at a SaaS-based solution. So again, let's go to the repeatable design process for a second. So we've kind of hinted at it. It's in the book, but the steps are define your protect surface, understand your transaction flows, architecture controls, do your Kipling method policy design, and then monitor and maintain so that if you're seeing things slip through, right, that can re-inform your design methodology. So I don't think necessarily that cloud, you have to do cloud to do zero trust. It's probably easier to do that maybe when it's on-prem, because you necessarily own all of the controls and you can have visibility into what's going over the network, what's running on that machine. You have maybe more definitive visibility into that. And so, so what's a protect surface? Protect surface is the opposite of an attack surface. An attack surface, I think attack surface management, I know that's a Gartner buzzword, but I think that's a total lie. You don't control your attack surface because everything on the internet could be a part of your attack surface. When you think of the Peloton breach, right? How did they exfiltrate data? Well, they reverse engineered their API that any mobile device in the world could have connected to. They figured out that there was a vulnerability and they were able to exfiltrate data through that API. Did you know about that API when you were thinking about your protect surface? So the step two, mapping your transaction flows, there should be zero unknown traffic in your environment. If it's unknown, it should be blocked. This is a challenge in modern environments, right? So think about TLS 1.3. Think about Google's new Quick protocol. Those layers of encryptions are designed for privacy, where a man-in-the-middle kind of breaking, or some organizations will do decryption through some sort of proxy. That doesn't work anymore. You can't block unknown traffic anymore when those protocols are in use, and maybe that's good. Again, thinking about tools, right? If you were using network-based tools like an IDS, IPS, Palo or Cisco or whatever firewalls out there, the network is becoming less valuable. It's pushing more agent-based. So, do you have that same visibility inside your cloud environment to know everything that's going on there? Are you logging everything to a SIEM? Are you doing NDR and being able to pick up things off the wire? Cloud is very challenging for that. When you think about architecting your security controls, right? So you've already done your design methodology. You're halfway through the process before you even think about what controls you're going to apply. And again, you may be limited in a cloud environment with the controls that you use. Step 4 in the design process is what you kind of referred to earlier as the Kipling method. And so, that sounds complicated, but really it's just an homage to Rudyard Kipling's poem about 6 honest men. That's where we get the common grade school phrase who, what, when, where, how, and why. Those are your 6 honest men from the poem. So thinking about the way we do security today, when I think about, I have a network background, so when I think about policy, I think about firewall policy. But that's certainly valuable. But if you're having a conversation about policy in an interdisciplinary team, your antivirus has policy today. Your developers are pushing policy as code to your containerized apps. Your identity folks are thinking about policy to control permissions and access to different services, or using two-factor and credentialed access. So having this kind of abstracted conversation about policy, who, what, when, how, and why, allows this interdisciplinary team to think about what am I actually trying to achieve, and then they can all go back to their separate tools, whatever those tools are, to achieve that in all the different ways we're supporting this particular protect surface. And then at the end, did we do a good enough job? Are there things slipping through? And one of the things about zero trust is it's really about problem management. We tend in security to be involved in a lot of the firefighting, the incident response, and we don't necessarily always think about the big picture. But if you have an MSSP or Security Operations Center service, they can help you be a part of that conversation So when they're monitoring that on the back end, they could help eliminate whole categories of issue by saying, hey, we're seeing this kind of thing come in your logs. If you click that checkbox in this other control, this problem goes away, and we can get to the next level of maturity and focus on other alerts that are maybe more of a concern. So having that design process, again, you can apply that process whether you're 100% on-prem, whether you're 100% in the cloud, whether you're hybrid. And it's just a matter of getting your arms around all of the different things you're going to have to manage, all the tools you'll have to work with. Definitely doing hybrid is a challenge because you got to do both, and you've got to do both equally well. So I think helping folks understand that, and cloud is a very costly way of doing business. Sometimes it helps organizations scale very rapidly, but do you have the same level of maturity in cloud services? Perhaps, but also perhaps not.
Definitely true of public cloud, and it can be true of private cloud as well, which is where I guess Mirantis mostly concerns itself. If you do it wrong, you're still buying a lot of iron and you're still dealing with a lot of complexity. But it's interesting, at least to me, that that private cloud provides maybe a more trustworthy framework for implementing this sort of thing than public cloud does. I have long been a fan of public cloud in the sense that, as you say, it allows a great deal of agility and fast ramps and, that kind of thing. And I've long discarded the idea that AWS, with all of their geniuses, is less secure than my, private thing, but in a sense that could be true.
I think this is something we hear a lot, right? You can outsource the work that you do in security. You can't outsource the responsibility for security. And again, whatever your solution is, you're going to have to find creative ways to solve those problems.
It does sound, though, like it's got to be a pretty meticulous process, that this can't be automated away into a single notion of who, what, when, where, why, that works for more than a small handful of closely analogous applications, perhaps within a single environment, But really, you're walking from environment to environment, to entity, and looking at the real situation, and using the tools that are on the ground, pretty much, to implement zero trust, which means 1 minute I'm dealing with, I don't know, my email server's notion of how it defends itself from the world, or my Linux server's notion, or my this, or my that, or my, or whatever, right? And is that how it works? Does it nonetheless get done in finite time because the abstraction is simpler to apply and people can communicate about the abstraction to determine whether something is secured? I mean, I wonder what meetings look like where you might be the chief information security officer and you might have had a discussion with some expert who's building some containerized app someplace, right, that needs to run in your system. And you've spoken to that person about abstractions that they have then applied. What level of assurance? I mean, can you trust them? So
zero trust is about not trusting packets, not trusting computers. We have this problem with anthropomorphization of computers, right? You think of George's packets or George's computer. We still have to trust other humans to do our job. I really like the book Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey that talks about how trust isn't binary. It's not a spectrum. It's actually a matrix. There has to be both trust as well as skepticism at the same time to really have good judgment. So is it a meticulous process? Well, yes. And that goes back to the humans. It's fascinating. So I didn't just work with John on the book. I'm not an expert in every type of security technology out there. I'm not an identity expert. So for the identity chapter, I actually interviewed multiple different experts in every field to kind of bounce some of the ideas to say, here's the case study. How can we go through this? One of the kind of light bulb moments came on for me when I talked to one of my gurus for developers, right? And I had the sense, right? Phoenix Project, which I was very much inspired by, made the bad guy of the story the CISO. So if you've read that, you'll kind of know, like, oh man, that was hard to read because I'm a security guy, and having the CISO be the bad guy is sometimes the problem. So I was kind of like, well, maybe I'll make the developers the bad guy in this story. So John talked me out of that. So thank you to him for doing that. But when I was interviewing these developers, I was pushing them on, like, okay, how do we solve the problem of writing insecure code? And his answer just lines up with everybody else's, which was just to say, like, look, we don't want to write bad code. That's not one of our objectives, or that's not part of our performance plans. Like, right. It's about deadlines, right? And you've got to meet the objectives that you've been given by your CTO, by your CIO, and you've got a deadline for the project of Tuesday to get something out. And that's it's really about what we prioritize in our organizations, and does is the IT department, I don't know, understaffed, right? Is that why we're spread so thin that we can't prioritize security? We've just got to keep the lights on. And I think if that's the case, right, there has to be a conversation in the organization about what their priorities are, right? And I know this week, right, it's the CLOP Move It ransomware campaign. Potentially thousands of companies across the world use that software and could have been victimized. And of course, when the threat actor learned at the end of last month that their 0-day vulnerability had been now disclosed, there's time pressure on the ransomware gang to get as much out of their remaining 0 days as possible before people patch. So some organizations are shutting their services down for multiple weeks, right? Think about the impact to the business that shutting your IT operations off for a few weeks, spending months trying to restore, right? So, in a way, we've been short-sighted in the way that we do IT. Because we've been prioritizing things. We're trying to just keep things working with bubble gum and duct tape, and I think the reality is we have to have security as one of the main pillars of all IT operations moving forward, right? It's not just keep the lights on, keep it working quickly, making sure it's usable for your employees. We've got to have security built into every tool moving forward, and until we do that, right, security is going to continue to be a massive challenge for us.
I so much of it does seem naively to have to do with the fact that the software is invisible, at the end of the day. I mean, if you're building a department store, you can't open the store unless the doors are on and the windows are there, and it's obvious to everybody when you're ready to open the store, right? The carpet's been laid and the displays are right, but nobody can tell you with software, right? I mean, if you have functionality where you can launch, and there are people who are under time pressure to do things that are very close to that, even if they have the best will in the world and they know better.
I worked in retail when I was in college, and security is hard to visualize even in a retail kind of thing. I learned that there was this guy, and he helped unpack all of the clothing that we had at this particular retailer, and the store had locks. They monitored the cash registers and everything, but he had stolen, like tens of thousands of dollars worth of clothing, because what he did was, he'd unpack everything and then they recycled the cardboard boxes. And so what he would do is he would put a pair of expensive blue jeans or whatever inside the folded up box. And then they kind of like taped it shut. And then as they picked up the cardboard, he actually asked us to help him with all of this cardboard that he had to take out to recycling. So they throw it in the recycling dumpster and they were like, oh, okay, we can finally go home. It's midnight. We've been working, all night long. We had to clean up. And then, later on at 2 a.m. or whatever, after everybody's gone, he'd run back, get all of the cardboard out of the recycling. And now he's got, thousands of dollars worth of retail product that he was going out and reselling or doing whatever. Like that's an invisible process. It's really hard to think of that as a use case. And oh my gosh, insiders are always a big issue. But you have to have some level of knowledge inside your company to continually kind of visualize that. And man, that's it. As an abstraction, security is always an abstraction, and you've got to think about how what loopholes are there. But that's the case with everything in life, right? The legal system always loopholes. When you write a law, when you have case law, people will work around that. We have to be able to think creatively and kind of imagine a future where we can be successful in order to be successful.
In the end, though, I guess John certainly and others and you in earlier conversations have emphasized that this is a doable thing, that this is not, a science fiction kind of, this is not a high abstraction that is practically impossible to implement in reality. This is not something that you have to do all at once in a fourth dimensional chess game act of genius across an entire organization's technology assets, that you can move from system to system to system to system in something of a non-disruptive way as you go, and end up with a zero trust state that you can optimize, which is probably as good as it gets, right? I mean, as you said earlier, done is, it's hard to define done.
I think, certainly, I think it's been like mathematically proven that there will always be, potential vulnerabilities in hardware or software. So again, zero trust, is for the humans, right? That's what a strategy is for. It's rallying people together for a common purpose. We often say in security, and this is totally wrong, we should stop saying it. So don't say this anymore. But people aren't the weakest link, right? People are the only link when it comes to our organizations. There's a pitfall sometimes with zero trust, right? When people hear it, they think I shouldn't trust other people. They become cynical instead of having that good judgment that we talked about. If we fall into the trap of cynicism, again, from a psychology perspective, we know the Pygmalion effect, or the Rosenthal-Jacob effect. They in an elementary school in the 1960s, they taught the teachers in the school that the worst performing students in the class were actually the best at the beginning of the year, and vice versa. The best performing students on a test were the worst. They let the teachers go the entire year, and then they tested the students again, and as it turns out, the students that the students that the teachers believed were the best performing students had the best learning outcomes at the end of the school year. So if we believe that we're going to fail in security, we're going to make that come true. So optimism isn't naivete. It's a prerequisite for success in any human endeavor, right? So I do believe that zero trust is something that we can be successful at. It doesn't take a rocket scientist. And while there may be, hardware or software vulnerabilities that are always present, that doesn't mean that they're actionable. That doesn't mean that we can't put controls in place to make it extraordinarily difficult for those vulnerabilities to be exploited. And that's what zero trust is about, right? It's figuring out how to craft, custom tailor your security for your unique industry, your unique organization, and the tools that you use in your environment?
Well, that's extraordinarily eye-opening. I read the book, of course, as soon as I first heard your name from Jason, and now I'm going to have to go back and find all the Easter eggs. It turns out, but this is clearly the kind of book that you have to read many times, certainly before you trust yourself to sit down and try to implement anything. It's been great having you on this show. I feel like I'm getting to gradually greater and greater clarity, but this is this is not a simple set of problems. Certainly, if you go to the NIST documents, which is another worldview on this same material, it does not read like a thriller novel. It would not get 4.7 on Amazon and Goodreads.
My favorite part of the whole book was
bless their hearts, of course.
It's on Audible as well. I only listen to books these days, and we actually got one of the actors from The Walking Dead to be the narrator for the book. So he really does bring all those characters to life, and oh my gosh, I mean, it's such a cool, fun story. Definitely check it out.
Thank you for joining us, and please watch email for reminders about our next Mirantis webinar.